I run the Social Good Startup Program here at Blackbaud, and it is my absolute honor to welcome everyone to this session today on the emergence of ChatGPT and AI tools for fundraising with my friend and former colleague, Bill Walsh, and the fantastic pilot, Rich Muniz of BrightVine Solutions. Special thanks to BrightVine for being a sponsor of 2023's BB Dev Days conference. With that, I'm going to hand it over to the stars of the show, Bill and Rich. Take it away, and I will be keeping an eye on the chat for any questions that y'all have and want to post in there as we go. All right, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lizzie. Welcome, everyone. We appreciate you joining us today. We're excited to take a few minutes at today's Dev Days conference to talk about the emergence of ChatGPT as a tool that is being asked for and requested from your external users, from your internal users, and even for many of you as developers and business analysts. What does this mean to me, and how does it particularly impact fundraising and our fundraising solutions? So Rich, why don't you say hello and introduce yourself for everyone today?
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Rich Muniz, the CTO of BrightVine. Super excited to be here as well. Been doing this now for 10 years, and I think I've never been more excited to think about technology stack as it's starting to become something and really start to have meaningful conversations about AI tools and what that means for all of our futures, to be honest. Super excited about this session, our session tomorrow. We'll put a plug in there at the end of this as well. But super excited today. So, Bill, all you, my friend.
Awesome. Thank you, Rich. I'm Bill Walsh. I probably know many of the folks on this call from some days working with you at CRM or Razor's Edge customers. I'm excited to be part of the BrightVine team today, presenting to you as a VP of Strategy and Innovation, and to really kind of look ahead to the future and think about where are we going and how is the world changing. I love working with all of you as customers in the past, and hope that we may have some opportunities in the future. But a quick note about BrightVine, and I'll keep this very quick. But I'm surprised a little bit that some folks haven't heard of us. We are one of the world's leading data services and data transformation companies working with Blackbaud CRM and larger customers. We also provide strategic services and managed services as well for Razor's Edge and Blackbaud CRM. And the context for today is our kind of emerging practice around services and looking for products that relate to AI and machine learning opportunities. And that takes us to today. Promised you I'd keep that brief. To talk a little bit about how are you being challenged? What sort of scenarios are you hearing about where people are saying, I'm hearing about ChatGPT and how it might be useful or apply to the fundraising domain. What could I do? What could you do? If you're a business analyst, a developer, if you're an IT leader, how are you being challenged? So we're going to take 3 use cases today. We're going to start with somebody from outside your organization that poses the question, I'd like to give to a charity. And let's take a look at who comes up and whether your organization is on that list, which might be impactful if you're in a role where you're being challenged to understand what are the tools and the context and the data that surfaces that kind of search information, not just for websites, but now leading into AI. The second challenge we'll see, and Rich and I brainstormed on some different use cases, and we kind of picked one for today. We had a bunch in mind, but help me write a contact report. Your internal users are saying ChatGPT is out there. Why can't it help me do a better job? And you as a developer may be challenged within your organization to support that use case through the interface or even through programmatic means. And we'll explore that today. And then lastly, Rich is going to touch a little bit on a third use case for the developers conference, which is the emergence of help me write code better and faster through these types of tools. Context. So all of these require a little bit of context. We're going to circle back on that in just a few minutes. Now, when I first came up with this idea for the session, it was 3 months ago, I guess, and it was, hey, why don't you show them what all the different tools are, and let's log into ChatGPT and Bard. And you know what? We're in June, and the acceleration adoption curve for these tools passed 100 million users by February, one of the fastest growing tools in history. So we're not going to set this up or create an account. We're going to kind of move much more quickly. And you're already seeing these engines move very quickly directly into the application stacks. We use Notion at BrightVine, as well as Slack, and they're emerging there, and Microsoft Copilot. So the tools are emerging right off the bat for access to folks. We're just going to get right to the kind of prompt that I hope many of you are already sort of familiar with, where we're we're dealing with, believe it or not, a command line interface, which is kind of crazy in this day and age. I read a great article talking about the Apple VR launch yesterday, and they're talking about user class of 900,000 projected sales, and it's competing with 100 million users for ChatGPT, which is a command line interface. So it just shows you that the user interface is much more about the capability. So the question I asked in this case to ChatGPT was, I want to give money to an organization that supports climate change. Which one should I give to? And we can see it's already similar to Google, but it's trolling a lot of the various sources and probably much more to come back with a list. The Sierra Club, Natural Resources Defense, Environmental Defense. It's telling me a little bit about some of the potential organizations I might give to, and it's limiting it to 5. So who's in that top 5 list? What is it saying about them? I also plugged this same question into Bard. So one of the things that I do in my testing is really go compare Bard to the the OpenAI toolkit and look across to see how they're different. And here you can see a different set of organizations pop up and appear, but some similar ones within that list. And of course, they make it so that you can do more research. You know, the end of all of these chats with these bots is, of course, you should learn more and do some more research. But my point with this is these are tools that are going to be embedded in the daily workflows of billions of users. They're going to be part of Microsoft Copilot. They're going to be part of Google Workspace. So you'll want to influence, as a nonprofit, your brand presence throughout this. So while many of you in the room aren't necessarily in control of your websites, you are in control of the tools, and you'll want to make sure that the content you want exposed on who your organization is and the funds and the scholarships and all the various things that you do are part of that world. So as I said, I developed this content a few months ago and realized we very quickly are kind of past this point. So I think where we really want to get to is something a little more relevant to things that you do every day or that your users ask you about. So let's kind of get to a use case that is pretty near and dear to my heart. Probably a few of you in this room might have stood in front of you with a Blackbaud mobile product and said, I had a great meeting with Robert Hernandez. We met for lunch and we talked about scholarships for chemistry research or something like that, and recorded it into Blackbaud mobile or a Razor's Edge tool. And that world is coming back around and potentially powered by ChatGPT. So we can imagine it replacing Alexa and replacing Siri and a few of the other tools because it's got much more context, much more human interaction. I started this example, though, just saying I have a contact report. Perhaps this is one of your fundraisers typing an email, or maybe they're experimenting on their own and they're coming to you as developers saying, hey, I've been using this and it's helping me. Let's take a quick look at this, right? Rich expressed an interest in a gift, wanted to discuss some other options. We talked about scholarships. He's going to think about it. And then we look at the revised. It's not significantly different. It spread it puts a better language in there. It cleaned it up a little bit. It made it a little bit longer, a little more polished, and it fixed some of the pronouns that I had made a mistake with. So when we take a look at what it's offering for your users, for your end users, it's similar to sort of a grammar checker, a spell checker. It will improve the formality of the language. There's a lot of opportunities in things like Notion, things like Copilot, things like Bard to say, make this more polished, make it friendlier. It can change the tone. It can easily do that and across any of these tools. And so really what it can do for your users is improve the speed to complete, potentially with fewer inputs. So it can improve the quality, it can make the quality of the report better, and it could speed the time to complete a contact report from one fundraiser to move on to the next. There are some cons we should point out, especially if I say make it longer. So I've noticed when I use the make it longer type of approach, that's where we start to see it sort of making things up. It fills in the blanks and it doesn't always have the nuance. So back in this particular example, we said that he has historical gifts and it said he's a consistent donor. Well, consistent donor, loyal donor are different words to some institutions. So it can change the context a little bit and things can get a lot worse. I'm sure you're all familiar with some of the hallucination things that can take place. So we just have to watch out for that. And the main thing I want to get to is that it's not improving the substance. It doesn't understand what a contact report is. It doesn't know what good looks like. Can't really coach or train your user. So it doesn't have a context for the best practices or an understanding of the institutional's goals. So I wonder if there's a way to do that. And it turns out that in parallel, as I was playing with these tools, that Rich was doing some similar work in progress on his own into the idea of prompts and programmatic access. Rich, what can you do if you jump in and roll your sleeves up with your technical wizardry?
Well, I don't know about wizardry, but sometimes it takes a little bit of common sense to try to look at this, Bill. So when we started to look at how we could use this and extend something that might work for all nonprofits, whether you were a Blackbaud CRM or your Razor's Edge or your Arian XT, any of those products, right? The story is all largely the same, and a lot of it has to do with two things: what you're prompting, and meaning what information are you providing it for that has instructions essentially of what you want, and then what kinds of examples are you giving it, right? Such that you're providing it a framework, right, in order to know how to respond to you. And so one of the things that we started working with some of our partners, specifically, and give a shout out to our friends at Virginia Tech and at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, is to look at what are the questions specifically when it came to contact reports that you wanted to enforce, right, within, or that you wanted to basically be able to say what needs to be in these reports, right? And so by having that written down and thinking about the business process behind that, we could more successfully prompt ChatGPT with, here's the information that we kind of want to know, right? On top of that, the next slide for me, Bill. On top of that, we want to provide it with some examples, right? And it's much like anything. If you leave it to come up with whatever it's going to come up with, we'll get a series of different answers. However, if we do give it, right, a series of, here are the best case scenarios and here are the things that we don't like at all, right? It allows the large learning language essentially to go ahead and choose a better result for you. And so in the examples that we were playing with as part of this discussion today, and then have the next slide for me, Bill, as we looked at a couple of different prompts that we would provide it, right? So the first one being, let's talk and give it what are the answers that we want to make sure are enforced, right? So we used natural language to type this out. It's not any special magic code that we're putting in there, or we're not, having to write something in C# to put it in there. In this scenario, all we're doing is providing something that says, hey, a nonprofit contact report is considered good if it answers these questions. Now, I just have a couple in here, but if you look at the slide prior, that was, there were more questions that were given to it. I'm sorry, two prior, but there were more questions that were given to it to say, here are the things that were important to note as part of what I'm prompting you for. And the way that looks in ChatGPT when we do that is because of the conversational nature of using ChatGPT, right? We can give it those instructions prior to giving it our request, right? So we can say, hey, ChatGPT, here's what I think is a good contact report, X, Y, and Z. And then also ChatGPT, if you go back to my slide, Bill, here are two examples of actual contact reports that we've used in the past that were really good. Now, I will absolutely preface this by saying that anything you should expect and anything that you put into that chat window becomes essentially public information. So as we start to look at the sort of the downsides of ChatGPT or the downsides of other sort of generative AI tools, right? Security becomes of paramount, making sure that we're not actually putting constituent information in there, but just enough information so that it can actually be valuable for us. Go next slide, Bill. So you can see here that one of the questions, and I know, Bill, your face might be put, on top of the ask here inside the slide, but the thing that we asked it here was based on this exact criteria. So if we're looking at the prompts, right, we say nonprofit contact report is great if it's X. Here are some examples Y, right? And you can even prompt the tool to say, if you understand what I'm saying, reply with the word red, right? And that's what it'll do. The next thing was to say, based on the criteria above, and knowing the contact report that I just typed out, right, what are the things that are missing in the areas of improvement? And the next slide is what we actually got back, right? So here, ChatGPT has actually used what we actually told it to do and says, well, this does not include this. right? This does not include the name of the full name of the fundraiser, does not include where it was, does not include any mention of Rich's proclivity to giving. And so all of these questions, all these response was automatically generated by the tool. Now, when we look at the relevance of this sort of from a technology perspective, these are the tools that we're starting to place and then we're looking at putting into the tools like Blackbaud CRM, like RENXT and those kinds of things, right? And the goal here is not to essentially say it replaces humans. The goal here is to actually say there are things that we don't notice or that we don't, we can sometimes get tunnel vision for, right? That we forget that we should even be doing. So this provides a good backup for us, right? And those that will be attending essentially my presentation tomorrow, as we go through sort of actually how we build this in code, we'll see that some of the things that we are doing is being able to actually reach out to it on the fly within the tools, within Blackbaud CRM, for instance, right, and provide that feedback real time as users are entering in some of this information. Now, from a developer's perspective, this doesn't have to just be for fundraisers, right? It doesn't have to be just for somebody writing a contact report. And I just wanted to show a simple example. If you hit the next slide for me, Bill, a simple example of something that we have been using internally a lot recently. And not because we're lazy or because we don't know how to write code, but because sometimes we want to move quickly with our code generation. And using something like ChatGPT, as you can see here, I have a simple example. Write me a SQL function, takes in 2 parameters. I give it the names of the parameters, right? And tell it what it needs to do, right? And so what it does, it spits out that code for us. Now, the beautiful thing about it is that once it generates that code, we can look at that and say, oh, you know what? I actually didn't want that to be 100 characters. I want it to be 50. Well, the next prompt that we could give it, if we chose to, is to say, actually, make all the size of the fields 50. And it will go ahead and rewrite that code for us. And we've seen this usefulness across multiple different things, areas that we don't generally play in a lot, in the JavaScript and Angular environment sometimes, or, all the way to SQL, if we need a basic SQL statement. When we look at the code tomorrow, and I know I'm getting into sort of too much sort of code discussion and talk, but we can see that we can feed it existing examples of code, and we can feed it, data models and what have you, and it can actually create that code for us and save us hours of time as we're trying to work with it. So it really is going to revolutionize it on the developer level. Is going to revolutionize a lot of things that we're doing and how we generate code. And it can, as Bill has kind of mentioned, I think for fundraisers, it's going to change the way you work as well going forward as soon as security issues and things like that are sort of addressed. So anyway, back to you, Bill.
All right. So I hope that what you saw was some examples of kind of proof in action. And we're really at the art of the possible with where we are today, kind of showcasing a programmatic example of interacting with ChatGPT. Rich went ahead and built the actual code. He's calling the interface. So I started with the example of your user perspective, and then we went to an example of how could we embed and build this into a workflow. And so one of the things we're interested in exploring is what would that world look like with sensitivity to privacy if we could augment and enhance the user's experience. And so what are some ways that we might imagine a workflow emerging? And we're not quite there yet, so we're still on the lookout. And we love some test customers. So if this is something you're interested in, we'd love to hear from you. And I also want to suggest this is a great DIY type of approach as well. So do it yourself with the SDK, whether you're Razor's Edge or Blackbaud CRM, or frankly, other products from Blackbaud or others. The concept here is thinking through the workflow of what might we do. So when Rich and I were brainstorming, we thought first, well, if he's building a global change function, and so that's the first function he sort of implemented as, let's take the token from ChatGPT, let's build a global change with a date parameter, let's allow it to interact. And I talked this through with some of our early prototype customers, and I said, well, let's imagine then that we ran this on the last year of the fundraisers contact reports, and then we wrote back, here's some examples of contact reports that maybe could be improved. And they said, well, whoa, wait a minute. I don't want to waste my fundraisers' time. I really want to be very cautious and careful with their time. So it's just interesting hearing the pushback when the first thing I thought about was sort of this training rollout was really being careful for their time. And so it's a great conversation to have, is making sure that this is seen as a positive asset towards the betterment and improving the experience, and balancing the needs of the organization for better best practices with the needs of the user to have a useful tool that makes their lives easier and better. So we thought about maybe then what would the next step be. So those of you that are Blackbaud CRM customers, Rich and I were brainstorming on could we use an add-in function on the interaction form and have a button that said, coach me through my contact report. That might be a way to think about it. It could even be a set of tabs or interface workflows that said submitted contact reports with suggestions for improvement, with a review cycle, and then a closure. And by the way, this would be a great workflow tool through Sky APIs, either for Blackbaud CRM as it emerges with its improved interactions and contact report capabilities for major gifts for Sky, or even today if RE NXT would support that. So a Power Automate flow would be a beautiful way to kind of put treatment into this that had approvals and had steps with it. So we wanted to kind of come up with a real world use case. We wanted to see, would it actually improve the results? And in particular, I think what Rich and I were trying to tackle is the idea of the prompts and the guided experience, because the biggest problem we have is context. It doesn't understand the fundraising domain and realm. And so by having multiple contact reports provided as an example, it did give back relevant and meaningful results. There's some other things, and I'm sure there's been a lot of brainstorming, but we're imagining where prompts might improve things like gift agreements, acknowledgement letters, things like your fund outcome statements, where some real world examples can become prompts that guide the outcomes towards improvement. Now, what else could we do? I see a lot of concerns about privacy. What about if you put the Billy Big Mouth on your wall and your fundraiser's talking to it? Would that lighten the mood just a little bit? I was just trying to think about watching the space of, I have a news feed that pops up for anything AI related. And so anything and everything comes into my news feed. So apparently one interesting hacker has got Big Mouth Billy Bass to interact with ChatGPT. I did want to make a note for those of you that are thinking about doing this for yourselves, or that are vendors or partners, or you're wondering what it's going to look like in this world. So Rich and I were just doing some early cost modeling, and we're still in the very early stages of this. But Rich, our rough guesses so far are kind of in the $30 range, plus or minus, for your test account so far, if we project out to sort of a medium-sized organization with 10 to 20 fundraisers, something like that.
Yep, correct.
So I think we were trying to understand as a vendor who either would think about this as a service to customers or even a product, is this feasible and practical? And the answer is yes. So I think it's something that if you are trying to build a pilot, or you are thinking about rolling it out in your organization, the early results, and again, these use cases are very specific to what we did, are that the affordability is pretty reasonable. So that was kind of good news. It also means that commercial partners are going to be able to find some affordability in these examples, particularly as they scale. And we did not optimize for some of the emerging repeated prompt methodologies. So in the case that Rich is doing, it's passing the same prompts in each time, which generates a bigger payload and token package. And there are some optimization strategies that vendors can make to reduce that cost. We also didn't come up with or test through a larger scale example. So what happens if you take 10,000 or 20,000 new donors through and try to come back with a new solicitation letter? So not quite scaling up to the large scale, really sticking with a model for the smaller range, but it's proving that it's quite effective and is practical. All right, let's take a minute. There were a couple of questions, kind of starting with the positive and starting with exciting opportunities and news, but there's really more to it. So do we know how this is going to impact everything? Well, let's ask the AI and it'll tell us how it's going to impact everything. But the answers it comes back with might not be what we want to hear. So as we explore this, particularly at BrightVine, I think first and foremost, we look at this through the lens of let's augment human performance. Let's take a model and some examples that are designed to uplift the humans in our organization, make them faster and better, improve their behaviors towards organizational models and norms, and not think about so much how we might replace the human, but let's figure out how AI is an augmentation and supplementation strategy. Within along the ways, let's find the ways to respect and explore privacy. And I saw those comments. So in today's prototype, we haven't put that model in place, but that is going to be a great conversation to have in terms of the licensing and the process and holding vendors accountable for how they treat data and the data transfer. And I really think, I kind of say this, I know Blackbaud's, going to be a vendor that speaks to social good space, and I'm speaking at it as a vendor along with Blackbaud in the social good space. We think about starting with good intent. How are we going to make AI be a tool for good and take us in a positive direction? So the examples we've chosen today are really driven towards that model of making the world a better place and thinking about AI as a tool that makes a difference, makes people happier in how they're doing something. And then the last comment I'd make is disclosing the use of AI to your users so that they understand that it's a helpful tool and not a secret thing. So I just think there's some practices that we can employ to make this feel like a more comfortable, confident rollout. So some recommendations and thoughts that emerge from this. AI and machine learning are coming. This is a wave that's here. You're seeing it in the news every day if you're following or tracking things. I think we'll learn that early adopters will see some immediate benefits, but some caution is warranted for a couple of reasons. The tools in the platform are rapidly evolving and changing. Legislative and ethical landscapes continue to be defined. So it certainly warrants some caution in terms of how much you invest, whether you're rolling up your own sleeves and thinking about, opening up the SDK or the Sky APIs and doing some work yourselves, and having a little bit of caution in how you think about it. But don't shy away from exploring its impact and finding ways to use it now. And then I dropped in that note about user needs and organization needs because I think there continues to be sort of a sense of how can we make AI feel like a tool that benefits the user and benefits the organization? So the example you saw me choose kind of has this sense of a contact report could be made faster, easier, and better. Make my life easier as a fundraiser, while at the same time providing a framework for organizational standards and best practices to improve the overall data quality and reportability of those contact report results. If we can mesh together those two concepts, we can create a win-win and an atmosphere that builds better trust and adoption for the types of tools that we're all considering. And Rich, I think you mentioned this, but maybe go ahead and say again about what's coming next.
Sure. Yes, and I agree with all your points today, Bill. I think largely the words trust but verify are probably the best ones here, right? Is at least at the onset and probably for the foreseeable future, right? These are tools that will help us, but we need to make sure that and look at what they're providing, right? To everybody's points in the chat about security and all those pieces. So so tomorrow during our skills lab, which is at approximately 4 Eastern tomorrow, we're going to be going into a deeper dive of the actual code and actually showing how we would connect to ChatGPT and to some machine learning components as well. And we'll kind of walk through as a more technical level how all that works, and you'll be able to take that code with you and play with it to your organization's needs as well. So looking forward to meeting everybody tomorrow, whoever shows up. Otherwise, thank you all for your time today.